Good morning, Team Alabama. We are ready for another day of the Lottery Rose. Please find it on your Chromebooks on page 94. Please find it on your Chromebooks on page 94 and read along with me while I read it. She walked down to the back lawn with him and watched as Sister Monica handed out mattresses and sheets, giving orders as to where they should be placed. A big circle to make conversation easier, she explained to Sister Mary Angela, and hopefully a little quieter, she added laughingly. Remember, Judge O'Neill sent out air mattresses, and Georgie was asked to participate. Among the 10 boys sprawling on their mattresses, 9 laughed and bragged and jeered at one another, while the 10th one of them quietly listened. Okay, jeered might be a great word to add to your vocabulary. Georgie had no jokes to tell. He had lied often, but his lies were not funny, made-up ones that Timothy and his friends told. Once, when I was a cattle rustler out in Colorado, that was a lie very different from the one which claimed that Georgie had not set fire to a pile of papers under Miss Cressman's car. To listen to the others was fun, though. Sometimes he laughed, a low laugh that no one heard, after an especially funny joke that he would think, tomorrow I'll tell that to my rose bush. These mattresses are okay, ain't they? A dark boy named Terry asked. The old judge had a bright idea this time. This time, yes. Last time, no. Timothy interrupted. Remember last fall when he sent cartons of bath soap and powder for Athlete's Foot? Wow. That wasn't the judge's present. That came from one of his rich friends. Whoever it was, wow. Oh, well, you win a few and you lose a few, a boy they called Kevin said mildly. I got invited to go to town in the station wagon and help Sister Monica pick these mattresses up at the post office, Terry said, looking pleased with himself. What's so super about going into town in the station wagon? Timothy asked scornfully. Nuts to you, Terry. Terry shrugged. Oh, well, it was fun. We drove back on the lake road because Sister wanted to see the birds are out on the lake so far this spring. We saw 2 blue heron and 1 egret. There's about 1,000 gulls out there, and there's a new family of ducks quacking and swimming around in circles like a bunch of dumskies. Maybe that's the reason Robin likes them so much. Dumskies like other dumskies. A dark-haired boy giggled. Shut your mouth, Richie. Several of the boys yelled together. Yeah, Richie, shut up. The voice was Timothy's. That's a cheap shot, making fun of Robin. Paul would hate you for that, Richie, another boy scolded, and then he turned to Timothy. Does Georgie know about Paul? Yes, I told him, Timothy answered. The voices had been growing loud during the past few minutes, and now Sister Monica appeared on the balcony above the night campers. It's 9:45, gentlemen. Get those voices down and either be asleep or act like you're asleep by 10 o'clock. Otherwise, whoosh, you and your mattresses will be sucked up by a strong wind and landed in your rooms upstairs. Georgie sank back into his mattresses and glad of the cool, fragrant air that surrounded him. The pills were already making him drowsy. It was pleasant to feel sleep overcoming him as he listened to whispers and low giggles around him. He was the first boy among the 10 to get to sleep within Sister Monica's 15-minute order. It was still dark when he awoke, refreshed and ready to begin an important day. When he heard the bell in the front tower chime 4 times, he thought he couldn't live through the long line of hours that must pass before he would walk across the street and into the garden for his promised visit with his rose bush. He was wide awake and tired of any bed. He was wide awake and tired of any bed after many days of illness and inactivity. He sat up and looked across the street where darkness covered everything, allowing only gray outlines of the big white house to show through the night and the blacker shadows of tall palms on the school ground to shift lazily in the breeze. He could barely recognize Timothy sound asleep on the mattress beside him. The dim figures of the other boys sprawled a short distance away. He breathed deeply of the fragrant air that drifted across the garden, feeling almost giddy with the heavy perfume and the softness of the night air. Above him, the sky had stars scattered all over it. some so low that a boy able to climb the highest palm with an arm suddenly well again might pull some of them down and watch the light flash in them as they were dropped from one hand to the other. He dreamed of that possibility for a while, and the earliness of the hour together with the darkness pushed the real world away from him. He seemed to hear voices all around him. How did you ever get them out of the sky? The voices wondered. What are you going to do with them? Stars, Georgie. After a while he heard Timothy, excited and pleading. Can I hold one of them, Georgie, just for a little while? His own voice had grown deep and quiet, like Mr. Collier's when he answered, No, Timothy, you can't. They belong to Mrs. Harper's boy, the one that would be as old as us if he wasn't dead. After a while, another voice called him. It was faint and far away, but it insisted that he listen. Why do you have to wait all those hours till tomorrow, Georgie? I need to talk to you right now. He rose quietly from his mattress and stood listening intently. After a minute, he walked very slowly across the wide lawn and into the street. Of course, he thought, of course, I have to do it. Out in the street, he stood with his good arm outstretched and his face turned up to the starry sky. He laughed softly to himself as the light wind ran through his hair. I am like the boy in the story. I am all alone in the night, and nobody can see me. He wished that he could sing as the boy in the story sang, but he didn't know a single song, although that evening his throat had tightened as if it had wanted very much to sing when he heard Sister Mary Angela's music coming from the chapel. But anyway, I have a rose bush. That was enough. He knew that the cuts and the scars and the purple spots made his face ugly. He knew that he couldn't sing, and that he couldn't read the way that Mrs. Harper's boy had probably been able to read. His joy, however, was above all that. He had his rose bush, and in another minute it would know that he had not forgotten it, and that at 4 o'clock in the morning he was not afraid to come to the garden and visit his friend. The thought sent him hurrying down the street, and he tried to run, but his legs were still like rubber, and he was forced to move slowly, glad to grasp the wickets of the garden fence occasionally and wait for his legs to relearn something that they had forgotten while he lay in bed. When he reached the rose bush at last, he found it tall and still a little frail looking, but beautiful in his eyes. He sat down near its base and grasped the cluster of stems closest to the ground. Do you want to know something about me? He asked eagerly. I can read. He waited for a second, and then he felt the rose bush tremble with joy and surprise. Georgie hugged it, remembering what the grandfather had said about roses being sensitive. You are too, he said. You understand, and you know what? I'm not even dumb anymore. I'm even smart enough to read in a book that belonged to her boy, if I wanted to, but I don't. I won't read any of her books. She pulled you up and said she'd throw you in the incinerator. She would too, except that Sister and Robin's grandfather won't let her. I hate her. I always hate anybody that is mean to you. Up in the big house, he noticed the one window where a dim light showed. The grandfather probably leaves a light so that the little boy won't be afraid, he thought. I'll read to him as soon as I learn more. He turned again to the rose bush. And I'll come here and read stories to you too. You'll like my stories. I know you will. You're my friend, my sensitive rose bush. The word felt good on Georgie's tongue, and he bent his knees and lowered his head upon them, pleased that stretching the muscles on his back did not hurt as much as it had before he was sick. Keeping his good arm around the bush, he let his head rest against his knees and sat very still while drowsiness returned and pulled at his eyelids. A scampering lizard ran over his bare toes, and a sudden flutter in the nearby cluster of flowers suggested that a snake might be out foraging for an early breakfast. Okay, there are about 3 words there that you might want to add. Scampering, a scampering lizard, and this is on page 100. And flutter, a sudden flutter in a nearby cluster. And then foraging. Okay, those are 3 great words to add to your vocab list. Some insect took a vicious bite at one of the ankles, and the night bird hidden in one of the trees complained that Georgie had no business to be in the garden at a little after 4 in the morning. If you want to add vicious, you can too. I'll tell on you, it rasped over and over in such strident tones that a whispering and then a chattering commenced all through the garden as dozens of birds woke up early. You might want to add rasped and strident. Over at the school, the big bell in the tower chimed once, which meant that it was now 4:30. Georgie's head grew heavier on his knee until the knee collapsed, letting him tumble to the ground. He pressed his face close to the base of the rosebush and muttered, "Just a minute, just another minute, and I'll go back." Then his body relaxed in the soft sand, and he slept deeply, unworried and unafraid. Okay, we're going to stop there for today. You might want to add a few facts. Georgie left the group that was sleeping out on the air mattresses and went over to talk to his rosebush. And he treats the rosebush how? You might add that as a fact. More like a friend. He treats his rosebush like a friend. And Timothy asked him to stay all night with the group of boys outside. And they kind of joked and lied, and he thought it was kind of fun to listen to them. Okay, have a great rest of your day, Team Alabama.